Okay, this is a video talking about changing fractions to decimals and back, and this would be useful. This is information that we covered just yesterday, and if you were absent, this is a video you should be watching because it's getting you ready for the practice and getting you ready for a quiz that comes after you do the practice. So we'll go through this, and really I think the notes are kind of self-explanatory, but I'll kind of clear up some things as we go through that. So to change a fraction to a decimal, you will divide the numerator, which is the top number of the fraction, by the denominator, which is the bottom number of the fraction. So if I showed you an example of that here, if we had 1 over 4, this would be my top number, my numerator, and this would be my bottom number, my denominator. So I would divide 1 by 4, and that's going to give me a decimal, because 4 will not go into 1 a whole number of times. It's going to be a fraction, so it's going to be a decimal. And so you could use a calculator for this. I would encourage you to use that for this unit. Have a calculator out so you can just make your work a little bit easier. If not, you're going to have to work it out like this, which is possible to do that, but it is more time consuming to go through the problems this way. So the answer would be 0.25, but I would just use a calculator for that. So the next slide deals with a few more examples. Write a fraction as a decimal, so you see that we have 6 over 5 this time. So notice that the 6 is bigger than the 5. We're going to divide both. We're going to divide 5 into 6. You can use a calculator for that again, dividing the numerator by the denominator, and we get 1.2. And you're done. That's it. Your answer has a decimal in it, and you are finished. And the next one, 7 over 16. You're going to divide 16 into 7 using the calculator again. This time we have a few more decimals, and we need to make sure that we include all of them. So it's 0.4375. With most of the stuff that we're going to do, I'm not going to have you round. We could round several place values in this. I don't want you to mess with doing that. So your answer would just be 0.4375. The second half of the information that we're going to talk about is changing decimals to fractions. Now this method is a little bit more difficult to go from decimals to fractions. Fractions to decimals is the method you just learned, and that's a little bit easier. So there are several steps here, and these are the things that you need to write down in your notes. Identify the place value position of the digit furthest to the right after the decimal. So if I gave you a number like 1.237. We need to start right here and identify that place value. The next slide we'll talk about how we do that a little bit more accurately. And then this is going to end up being the denominator. Now this is not saying 7 will be the denominator. It's saying the place value is going to be your denominator. It will always be a power of 10. So it could be 10 in the bottom, it could be 100 in the bottom, or it could be 1,000 in the bottom. Most of the problems I will give you will be one of those three options. And then that means, then write all the digits after the decimal. So in this case we have a 2, a 3, and a 7. That becomes your numerator of your fraction. If there is a number in front of the decimal, in this case there's a 1, that becomes the number in front of the fraction. So it would look something like this. In the next slide we'll explain a little bit more how I ended up with this 1,000 in the bottom, because that is a place value that the next slide talks about. So you might need to pause the video here so you can write the rest of this in your notes. And then the next slide is going to talk to you about place value. And that's what allowed me to put 1,000 in the bottom of my fraction, because if I look here, if we look at this right here, we see that this lays out for me each place value, the 1, the 4, the 2, and the 7, and what place value that they're in. I'm not so concerned about the other side here. These values that are to the left of the decimal, we're not going to mess with those too much. They don't really have as much to do with what we're working on here with converting these decimals to fractions. So the first place value after the decimal is always called the tenths place. And then the next place value is called the hundredths, and then the thousandths. Okay, get my line underneath there, and then 10 thousandths is the last one. So notice where they're all at. This might be a nice chart to take a screenshot of. You could bring up the notes and do that, or just copy the entire thing down. There's a section at the bottom that says place value, and this is where I'd write this in. So you at least have this chart to look at. I will not go much further than where you see that place value of that 7. All right, simplifying fractions. Once we have our fraction set up, we have to simplify. This should be reviewed because we covered simplifying fractions in our last unit. You can find the greatest common factor of the numerator and denominator and divide both numbers by that. The example that I've been giving in class is of 8 over 16. The greatest common factor between these is 8, because 8 goes into both 8 and 16, but it's the greatest one that goes into both of them. 2 and 4 also work, but they're not the greatest common factor. So I would divide the top and the bottom by 8, and this gives me 1/2. That's one method. The other method is to take 8 over 16 again and then just divide them by a number that's common. It doesn't have to be 8. We could divide them by 2. But when I divide by 2, I'm going to get 4 over 8, which can still simplify again. I can divide it by 2 again, and then I get 2 over 4. But guess what? I can divide that by 2 again to get 1/2. So I get the same answer in both problems, no matter how I simplify. But you need to make sure that you are simplifying these problems correctly. So now let's look at a couple examples here. So write each decimal as a fraction in simplest form. So we are given 0.42. Since the 2 is in the hundredths place, remember, tenths is right here. So this is the hundredths place. You can use your chart to figure that out. That means I'm going to have 100 as my denominator. And the 42 goes on top. So 42 over 100. Both the numerator and denominator are even, so we can divide them by 2. 42 divided by 2 is 21, and 100 divided by 2 is 50, so our answer becomes 21 over 50. This fraction is in simplest form because the only number that will divide 21 and 50 without a remainder is 1. That's the way you know that it is fully simplified down. So there is our answer. Sometimes you have to simplify multiple times before you get the right answer. All right, 3 more examples and then the notes will all be done. And you'll just need to make sure that you have everything filled in because you do get to use this on your practice and on your quiz. So the first thing we're going to do is figure out what place value these are each in. And since we have 2 places here, so it's the tenths and then the hundredths, that's what the 5's in, so we're going to have our answer over 100. And then I just bring all of this to the top, so 25 goes in the top, leaving out my decimal, and then now I reduce. Both the top and the bottom here 5 goes into both of them, but I want to use my greatest common factor. That way I can reduce in one step. So I'm going to divide the top and the bottom by 25. Because 25 will go in to both of them, and that gives me 1/4. There's my answer for 0.25 is 1/4 as a decimal. The next 2 problems deal with having whole numbers in the front. So what it said on one of the previous slides is that when numbers are in front of the decimals, they go over here in front of your fraction. Well, this 6 is in the tenths place, so I'm going to have 10 in the bottom this time, not 100, and then 6 goes into the top. But I know that it can be reduced. These are both even numbers, so I'm going to divide the top and the bottom by 2, and that's going to give me 3 3/5. And then I am done because I've got it fully reduced. So we do have a whole number this time for our answer, and that's okay. Next problem, done very similar. The 14 is going to be your whole number. And then what place value is this in? You should have said tenths. And then the 9 is going to be in top. And then that can't be reduced because they don't have any common denominators, or they don't have any numbers that are common to both of them, no common factors. So that would be your answer for that one. So I'm hoping that going through these notes, making a video will help you. If you need to rewatch this at any time, even before the post-test, feel free to watch it, and that could help you prepare for putting all these concepts together later on.